I'm Patrick Giguere with Cosmic Alchemist Astrology, and thanks very much for tuning into this video. So in this one I want to talk about the alien threat economic stimulus. So I don't think a lot of people have seen this, or at least they don't remember it, but back in 2012 a so-called world-class economist, a so-called brilliant mind named Paul Krugman, who Harvard graduate, professor at Princeton, Nobel Prize winner. This guy back in 2012 said that a great way to stimulate the economy and rebuild it and to juice it up would be for officialdom, for the government, to declare an alien threat, so a threat from extraterrestrials in another world. And this would allow the building of new technologies, new weapons, and basically a new economy. And then he said, if it turns out not to be real, it'll be like that Twilight Zone episode, and oh well, we got a new economy. So this is very sly, it's very slick, it's very passive aggressive. So he's basically encouraging the powers that be to lie about an alien threat, to say it's real so that they can rebuild the economy and build new technologies and new weapons and, basically get a new economy. So I'm going to show you later in this video, I'm going to show you 3 different clips. I'm going to show you a clip of Paul Krugman during a CNN interview, interview on the Bill Maher, or Bill Maher, I can't remember how he says it, Bill Maher show. And then at the very end, after I'm done speaking, I'll show you a clip from NPR. That NPR clip is about 9.5 minutes. So I'm going to save that for the end. The other 2 are about 1.5 minutes. So they're pretty quick. So why this is important right now is because Congress, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, they've all been having ET, UFO, UAP hearings. And they're all saying, yeah, aliens or ETs may be a credible threat to our national security. So it took 10 years for government bodies, government authorities to come out and say this, but I think they're connected. And people might call me crazy and a conspiracy theorist and all that, but it's part of the strategy of gradualism that really the deep state, that officialdom, always uses, because as humans we usually have very short attention spans, and we usually don't really remember what happened a few months ago. So 10 years is quite a long time for somebody to remember what happened and to make a connection between the past event and present events. So I think this is absolutely connected, because people don't trust government anymore. Less and less people trust government. Less and less people trust the banks. Less and less people trust business leaders. And they don't trust the media either, which works for big business and big banking, just like the government does. So public trust is falling apart, and government and media need to recapture public attention on behalf of their deep state masters, and these deep state masters are big banking and big business. So yeah, this is very important. We haven't been, in modern times, we haven't been educated to make connections between things, to see things in a holistic way. But I think these are absolutely connected. And because public trust is falling apart, I think people in deep state, people in government, people in big business and big banking, they believe that we need a new threat to bring us all together, to galvanize us and to distract us from what they really want to do behind the scenes. So I do believe aliens are real, ETs are real. I don't think they want to invade this planet. I think if they were going to take advantage of us and exploit us, they would do it in a very sneaky way. They might create our industries and financial system and our political systems and just make it look like we're in charge and we pick our own leaders. That would be a strategy they would take. So yeah, I don't believe there's any credence behind an ET invasion. Now, ETs may want to make contact with us and help us to liberate ourselves from the oppressive systems of authority on this planet. And there's a very good chance that deep state, using media and government, might want to stage a fake alien invasion. So they may have to level a city or two to get our attention and to convince us that this threat is real. So yeah, circling back, this so-called prestigious economist floated this idea. Now, this guy he's passive aggressive. He's kind of a soy boy. He's not, he's a beta male. He's not an aggressive, loud, alpha male type, kind of right-wing type. He's kind of, you can tell he's small, he's an intellectual, and he's passive aggressive. This guy can't do aggression. It's just not part of his makeup and who he is. So, to get what he wants, he's going to be passive aggressive. And this guy is, he's got a history, as you'll see in the NPR clip, he has a history of basically being a counter bully. So back during the, the Bush the stupid years, George W. Bush the son, he was taking a lot of shit from people on the right, politically right-leaning, when he was calling out the government for all, the unfunded wars they were fighting and the deficits they were running. So he was a big critic to that, and his response to being bullied by the right was to be a counter-bully. So then he bullied back. So he was no better than the people he was up against. So then with this whole alien invasion economic stimulus, he is just suggesting that we prepare for a war. So it's no better than what the right does, because the right loves to make money off of war, but the left does too. They just do it in a sneaky way, and they convince you that they love you and they're all compassionate and progressive and liberal. It's the same shit with different marketing and a different package. And another thing that all of this highlights is just how low our emotional intelligence is and how much our emotional intelligence has been neglected. For a very long time, intellect has been outpacing emotional intelligence. So we're great at crunching the numbers, crunching the data, thinking our way through problems, noodling the facts, but we can't tell when we're being manipulated, because we can only see it when it's an aggressive alpha male type, usually right wing. We can see the bullying, we can see the aggression when it's that guy. But when it's some 80-pound brain, some intellectual who's passive aggressive and he's kind of sneaky, and he's visibly kind of wimpy, we don't see it and we go, oh, he's just a loving, compassionate, liberal, progressive. They're just as shitty as the right-wingers. They just have a different way of doing it, but it's very similar. So we need to get with the program here, because we're getting taken advantage of, and we have been. And another thing that this whole thing highlights, this is one of the brightest minds that the university system produces. Because this guy graduated from Harvard and was a professor at Princeton. So it's like, this is the best these fucking people can do. And really, if the university system was going to fix all the problems that we're dealing with, and was going to produce people that were going to fix them, they would have done that a long time ago. Everyone's just, so many people say, oh, education, just solve your problems with more education. Well, the education sucks, because this guy is proof that all that a lot of people know how to do is just hero worship and mimic World War II and what was done back then. And this, for a large part, is very generational. So I don't want to make sweeping judgments about the baby boom generation, but it has a lot of problems. I know a lot of great people from that generation. They're very well-meaning people, hardworking. They're not brats. They're very good people. But there's a lot of brats in that generation. A lot of people in that generation, their big claim to fame in life is that people in their parents' generation fought in and won World War II. Not necessarily their parents. So it's their whole claim to fame. It's like they inherited a country from their parents in the same way that people often inherit businesses from their parents. A lot of time when businesses get passed down to the children, they run it into the ground. And that's what's been going on with the United States of America. It's been getting run into the ground by leaders from a generation who very often can't innovate past imitating World War II endlessly. And this has a lot to do with why innovation has been crushed. We're basically, really the whole world, well I don't want to say the whole world, but the United States and the Western world have been stuck in 1972, since 1972. We still have bullshit, illegal wars in the third world that are just a way of making money for a few companies and banks. We're still driving horseless carriages even though we were on track for flying cars by the 1980s. Back in the 1960s that was a projection. So we're still driving horseless carriages, and now we think we're having a brilliant intellectual debate when we argue about, well, should the horseless carriage be run by an internal combustion gasoline engine, or should it be a lithium battery? And the lithium mining is as equally horrible as oil drilling and refining as far as the environmental impact goes. It's possibly even worse. So we've been stuck without innovation for 50 years now. So we need to get past this. So yeah, this guy is the voice of the dark side of his generation. So yeah, we need to wake up here, because people are prepping a narrative and they're getting ready to sell it to us. And they're getting ready to play the fear factor, just like they did with 9/11 and COVID and you name it. They're always pushing the fear. So let's roll the clips now. Let's watch this CNN interview.
But even if you were, wouldn't John Maynard Keynes say that if you could employ people to dig a ditch and then fill it up again, that's fine? They're being productively employed. They pay taxes. So maybe Boston's big dig was just fine after all.
Think about World War II, right? That was actually negative social product spending, and yet it brought us out. I mean, partly because you want to put these things together. If we say, look, we could use some inflation. Ken and I are both saying that, which is, of course, anathema to a lot of people in Washington, but is in fact what the basic logic says. It's very hard to get inflation in a depressed economy, but if you had a program of government spending plus an expansionary policy by the Fed, you could get that. So if you think about using all of these things together, you could accomplish a great deal. I mean, if we discovered that space aliens were planning to attack, and we needed a massive buildup to counter the space alien threat, and really inflation and budget deficits took secondary place to that, this slump would be over in 18 months. And then if we discovered, whoops, we made a mistake, there aren't actually any space aliens.
So we need Orson Welles, is what you're saying.
No, there was a Twilight Zone episode like this in which scientists fake an alien threat in order to achieve world peace. Well, this time we don't need it. We need it in order to get some fiscal stimulus.
All right, so in that one, you're already seeing he's discussing this whole topic in a very offhand, kind of humorous, and just sort of, non-aggressive way. He's not coming out and saying, oh, we're going to kill the fuckers and build weapons and have World War III against aliens. He's just kind of like, well, maybe we could do this, and if it turns out not to be true, like the Twilight Zone, oh well, we just lied to all of you. So, he's just rolling out Twilight Zone episodes. He's copying them and trying to do basically a World War II sequel. So let's go into the Bill Maher show now. So, just a minute and a half here.
I have actually suggested
I actually have a proposal.
Am I getting wrong? Am I?
You got it.
Since it's hard to get people to do, I mean, much better, obviously, to build bridges and roads and healthcare clinics and schools, but my proposal. I actually have a serious proposal, which is that we have to get a bunch of scientists to tell us that we're facing a threatened alien invasion. And in order to be prepared for that alien invasion, we have to do things like build high-speed rail and then once we've recovered, we can say, whoops, there were no aliens. But look, I mean, whatever it takes, because right now we need somebody to spend, and that somebody has to be the U.S. government.
That's that side. Let's hear from Arthur Laffer, and then we will begin to criticize.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just say, first of all, Paul's completely right. We are in a depression. I mean, this has been the longest, worst recovery ever. It's just terrible. And that decline, while it's not as bad as the Great Depression, as far down as we went, the recovery is really rotten. But I don't think we have to do it by spending, government spending. My view is that I've never heard of a poor person spending himself into prosperity. The government doesn't create resources. The government redistributes them. And it redistributes them from workers and producers to people. They get the resources based upon some characteristic other than work effort. So what you really need to do is, I think you need to incentivize producers. And what you need to go along, in my way of going, would be Simpson-Bowles, something that lower the tax rates, broaden the base, get rid of the loopholes. I mean, really get a production base that efficiently starts, and that's the way you really get out of this depression. And
so now what you're going to notice from that clip is the laugh track. So I'm pretty sure Bill Mayer has a live audience. I don't think it's a recorded laugh track, but it's a laugh track nonetheless. And laughing does a couple things. Laughing allows people to float really serious, kind of terrifying ideas, and ideas that give insights into what people at the highest levels of authority are doing. But when it's turned into a joke, it's not taken seriously, so it allows you to speak very truthfully. And you can just laugh it off. Now, the other thing about laughing too is it calms people down. So very often people will be facing the truth. They'll be facing very harsh realities that have no convenient, easy solution. And you can see the wheels in their head turning, that something is true that they're very terrified of and that they would never imagine in their wildest dreams. And when they reach that moment where the discomfort is basically getting ready to climax, then they start laughing and they just disarm the whole thing and they just basically forget about what they heard or what they saw. People do this all the time. So this idea in 2012 is being thrown out in a very disarming, kind of a passive-aggressive way. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about that. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in. If you've not checked out my website, it's thecosmicalchemist.com. And now now that I'm finished, I'm going to roll that 9.5-minute NPR segment for you. So thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you later.
As the state of the economy continues to drive the national debate, economist and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman has probably captured as much attention and notoriety as anyone else in his field. NewsHour economics correspondent Paul Salmon spent some time catching up with Krugman recently. It's part of his ongoing reporting, making sense of financial news.
In Harvard Square, a homecoming of sorts for economist Paul Krugman. Partly because he went to grad school and taught for a while at nearby MIT, but mainly because in the academic, left-leaning town, sometimes teasingly titled the People's Republic of Cambridge, these are his people.
He's my lodestar.
He's your lodestar?
Absolutely.
A bit of a devotee, yes.
I definitely subscribe to him. I'm a strong Keynesian.
Krugman was here to promote his new book, End This Depression Now.
You say the word depression, people think 1930s.
Wait a minute, asked the event's MC, NPR's Tom Ashbrook. Depression?
Is Paul Krugman really saying we're in a depression like that depression? What?
Yeah.
Are we?
Yes, we are. This is not something that you can describe with the ordinary language of recession and recovery. This is something that is really terrible, and the damage is accumulating as we speak.
And Krugman, Nobel laureate, Princeton professor, New York Times columnist, is determined to do his bit to turn things around.
The economics is actually quite easy. It's only politics that's standing in the way.
The easy economics, Krugman told us at his home in Princeton, is that government should spend to goose the economy because the private sector, for various reasons, simply won't.
Markets are great things, and most of the time you want to let markets rip. But there are certain times and certain conditions under which you don't. When you're in a prolonged slump, a depression, that's when you need government intervention.
No wonder Krugman's home office sports a photo of an economic activist, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But it was science fiction master Isaac Asimov back in the 1950s and his vision of a manageable world, manageable through the analysis of data, that inspired the teenage Krugman to study economics. And maybe it also inspired him to fantasize, as he did last year, about an otherworldly stimulus strategy.
There was a Twilight Zone episode like this in which scientists fake an alien threat in order to achieve world peace. Well, this time we don't need it. We need it in order to get some fiscal stimulus. And, then after we're fully recovered, we can say, whoops, sorry, not actually coming.
A joke, but with a parallel to the economics of World War II.
The great military buildup that began in 1940 as the United States scrambled to get ready for the possibility of getting involved in this war was what brought us to full employment. And then in 2 years, the non-farm employment rose 20%. That would be 26 million jobs right now.
But we're not likely to have a credible alien threat anytime soon.
I probably shouldn't have said anything about this because I gave the game away. So yeah, I should probably have broached the thing quietly to some people at NASA.
But are you suggesting then that there needs to be some collective fiction?
No, we can get a lot of what we need, not by doing anything exotic, but just by restoring services at the state and local level.
But spending means more borrowing, driving up the interest rate on U.S. government bonds, we're told. Krugman counters that the interest rate is now at an all-time low.
If this isn't the time to be spending a lot more on things that are useful, like educating our children and fixing the holes in our roads, when is the time? If you were a businessman and somebody said, okay, you've got a bunch of investment opportunities and right now we'll let you borrow money for nothing, you would be derelict in your duty if you didn't do it.
But isn't too much debt a bad thing?
Yes, of course it is. But by allowing this extremely high unemployment to persist, we are damaging the future. It's not just current gain versus future pain. We have almost 4 million people who've been out of work for more than a year. Those people many of them are never going to re-enter the workforce. And those are the future taxpayers of America, which means we're cutting into our future, even our future budget position. An amazing amount of the stuff we're talking about is actually in Adam Smith.
As a columnist, author, and teacher, Krugman has become known as a voice of the left. But back in the 80s, he was a critic of union-backed anti-free trade economics. Did you have a conversion experience? What happened?
No. In the current context, because I'm defending an active government role, it's interpreted as some kind of a Marxist or a Stalinist, when actually all I'm in is doing textbook macroeconomics.
Are you surprised?
No. I'm well accustomed now to the notion that anyone who challenges conventional wisdom, and particularly anybody who calls out people on the right side of the political spectrum for what they actually do and say, is going to be demonized, is going to be made out to be some kind of extreme leftist.
Krugman's targets, meanwhile, have their own complaints. Krugman writes with more vitriol than I find attractive, says Harvard economist Greg Mankiw. From a trio of George Mason University economists, Krugman regularly demonizes his opponents. He treats anyone who disagrees with him as a mendacious idiot. He is an ideologue rather than a truth seeker. Even center-left columnist Michael Kinsley says Krugman should stop bullying people.
If standard economic analysis says that what important people, policymakers, are doing is completely stupid, the normal tendency is to sort of shade it and say, well, there may be a case for what they're doing. And I've been willing to say, no, actually what they're doing is completely stupid.
But it helps to have moral support. Krugman gets plenty from his wife, Robin Wells, also an economist.
Oh, great. Budget cuts hurt Washington State's response to whooping cough outbreak.
Their cats, by the way, are Albert Einstein and Doris Lessing, still purring after 19 years. Krugman and Wells have co-authored several textbooks together. She's also his sounding board and editor.
I remember saying to him back during the Bush years, I said, you know, you're up against bullies. And with bullies, you can't back down. Because if you back down, it's only going to get worse. They will not stop until they shut you up. You have to give back as good as you get.
And so Krugman has.
I guess I don't know how you can be honest about what's actually going on in this country without sounding partisan. That's the old line, right? The facts have a well-known liberal bias. Right now, we're in a world where deficits are a good thing, and a little bit more inflation would also be a good thing.
A proposal that's put him at odds with the man who hired him at Princeton, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke. Tom Ashbrook asked him about it.
Ben Bernanke calls your proposal very reckless.
Odd, because he made the same proposal himself 12 years ago for Japan. Those of us who have been calling for a bit more inflation are calling for 4% inflation, which is what we had back during the reign of Ronald Reagan in his second term. Didn't seem that terrible to me at the time.
But we could be taking a big risk, right? I mean, you have no way of knowing whether or not the interest rate we're going to have to offer to borrowers might change overnight, as it has often recently.
Well, I'm reasonably sure that isn't going to happen until or unless the U.S. economy is really on the path to recovery. And that's the point also by the way, when I will support fiscal austerity. Once we no longer need that support to keep the economy afloat, that's when you do want to start raising taxes and cutting spending, but not now.
And that seems to you completely obvious that we ought to do that.
Yeah, it's totally obvious to me. Obviously, it's not obvious to a lot of other people.
Yeah,
but
so how come?
You can't get too cynical. By and large, the people who are now ranting about debt and deficits are the same people who thought it was perfectly fine for George W. Bush to cut taxes without any offsetting spending cuts, who thought it was perfectly okay to have 2 unfunded wars. So deficits didn't matter when their guy was in the White House. Now it matters because somebody else is in the White House, and rest assured, if Mitt Romney is elected, they'll suddenly find reasons why cutting taxes, even if it increases the deficit, is no problem.
But that is a highly partisan remark, and exactly the kind of thing that even people on your side of the spectrum say you're too strident by constantly repeating.
Except it's true, right? And people like me have been right so far. And that doesn't mean we'll always be right, but if you got to choose who you're going to believe, you might want to at least seriously consider the people who've called it right on how the economy was going to evolve these past 3 years or so.
Paul Krugman, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for giving me all this time.
Online, we get much more from Paul Krugman throughout the week. Today, the liberal economist takes on European austerity, and scholar Jacob Kierkegaard of the Peterson Institute offers a rebuttal.